Hey there, welcome back. Joe Brunsman here, insurance broker to the stars. Back with what I would argue is the single most important insurance lesson that I can teach you. And with that, I would shamelessly ask you to share this video with all of your fellow business owners out there, anybody else in the MSP community, because quite frankly, this topic really is that important. This can save you from bankruptcy. This can save you from losing millions of dollars. It can keep your business open. So let's go ahead and jump into it, and I'll show you why it really is that important. All right, so when it comes to insurance, I know a lot of you guys, the year's coming to an end here. Thank God 2020 is almost over. But a lot of you guys are going to be renewing your insurance, and there's a lot of misconceptions there about how insurance operates. And quite frankly, I understand why that is. So when I first came into the insurance industry, I had a lot of preconceived notions about how this works. So I thought that, for example, claims were denied because they had these super brilliant attorneys on staff. And those brilliant attorneys, they would dig through the policy language and they would, create some novel legal construction because it was a semicolon instead of a colon. And then boom, there you go. And insurance companies are just screwing people over left and right. Well, quite frankly, you're most likely to have already screwed yourself. And that is what this presentation is about. And this is why I say it's that important. Think of your insurance policy. And I hate that word. It's actually an insurance contract. If you're going to play the game, you have to know the rules. So like me being an American, I would not just go play cricket. I have no idea what the rules are. And obviously I would lose. So this is me trying to help explain to you what those rules could be in your policy, that if you're not aware of what those rules are, it's very likely you're going to get burned. All right, a little bit of background on MSP, Tech E&O insurance policies. I'm going to say 99% of these are claims made and reported policies. Obviously, as I go through this presentation, you need to read your own policy, review it carefully, understand what's in there. I'm talking generalities here. Obviously, I am probably not your insurance guy. I'm definitely not your attorney. But here's generally what those claims made and reported policies mean. And you'll see right here in the black and white. The insured shall, as a condition precedent to their rights to payment under this coverage section. So that means for the insurance company to pay, what has to happen? The insured has to give the insurer written notice of any claim as soon as practicable. And in this particular policy, it's after an executive officer, risk manager, or general counsel of the company first becomes aware of such a claim, but in no event later than 90 days after the policy period. Now, I would just urge you, that 90-day period, that's for this particular specimen policy form. Your policy may be different. I would not bank on that. If you have a claim, you need to consider reporting that immediately. The next kind of obvious question here is, well, what is a claim? If it's saying you have to report this, what is it that you have to report? So look inside your own policy. I pulled out this example here because I think it's very useful to kind of elucidate the concept. It's way more than just somebody slapping a lawsuit on your front desk. And that's why I think everybody needs to go out and read these. So let's just go ahead and jump through these real quickly. Okay, a written demand against any insured for monetary damages or non-monetary or injunctive relief. So broadly speaking, in the insurance community, a demand is a request for money or services. So demand for money. Hey, I'm suing you. Or, an email or a phone call that says, you owe me $100,000. Great example there. But there's other issues here. So for example, a civil proceeding against any insured, a civil, administrative, or regulatory proceeding, arbitration or mediation. Hopefully you have some sort of alternative dispute resolution clause inside of your contract there, also known as an ADR clause. If you don't have that, just shoot me a message or whatever, and I can give you a couple attorneys that may be able to assist you with that. And then the bottom there is a request for a tolling agreement. What is a tolling agreement? Broadly speaking, that's where you get a letter from an attorney that says, hey, we're investigating these particular issues. We know that the statute of limitations could expire before our investigation is complete. Could you please sign this letter waiving your right to the statute of limitations? Now, I'll just go ahead and say this, and I'll leave it at this. You're going to want to talk to an attorney about that. If you do get a tolling agreement, generally those are a bad sign. All right, next, what is a potential claim? If you remember nothing from this presentation, this is the thing you want to remember. So you'll see here, if during the policy period, notice there's no 90-day caveat like you saw in the specimen at the beginning when we talked about a claim. If any insureds first become aware of a specific wrongful act which may reasonably bring rise to a future claim. All right, so let's go back. What is a claim? A demand for money or services. What is a potential claim? Anything that could potentially bring rise to a demand for money or services. So once again, let's reference this list here. What could happen that could potentially bring rise to a demand for monetary damages, non-monetary or injunctive relief? A whole host of things. It's way broader than you would imagine. Now remember, during the policy period, this has to be reported. Potential claim has to be reported during the policy period. Put another way, you need to consider reporting those potential claims before you renew your insurance policy, or you very well could get burned and you could be declined coverage. The next thing you really need to understand here, when we talked about a potential claim, we talked about a claim, they were talking about this idea of an insured. Now, if you remember at the very beginning, it said an insured in the company. So what does that mean? The two terms are not synonymous. Company does not mean insured. Insured does not necessarily just mean the business owners. Let's look at a definition here. Way longer than you probably thought if you hadn't read through your policy. So obviously it says insureds mean the company. Okay, that's part of it. Employees. So that means employees, obviously their work is covered. If they do some negligent act under your insurance policy, the insurance policy could respond to that. But that also means that they have an obligation to report claims or potential claims, as well as independent contractors. So you need to make sure that you're actually training your staff. So obviously, whoever's watching this, you're probably a business owner, I would imagine. So you probably own an MSP or you're a part owner. You also need to make sure that your staff is aware of what their obligations are under your E&O policy and that they are comfortable and knowledgeable enough to bring those issues up to management. The last thing you want to do is have an employee who thinks he's doing the right thing and, hey, maybe he screwed something up and you know what? He's just going to fix it. Well, if that just happens to go through your renewal period and later becomes a claim, you could be in a lot of trouble and your insurance company could deny coverage for you on that. So this right here is a little quick handy chart where we can go through. This was just for the specimen policy. You have to read and understand your own insurance policy. So you'll see here, claim and potential claim. Once again, not the same thing. Make sure you understand the difference. At least in this specimen policy, the difference was, okay, who had to report that? The executive officer, risk manager, general counsel, but in no event later than, 90 days after the policy period. So essentially everybody, anybody who's aware of a claim needs to get reported. Potential claim, it was if any insured knows about that, you have to report it. What's that time frame there? As I said again, in no event later than 90 days after the policy period, aka renewal for a claim. Once again, that 90-day period, that could change based on different policies, so make sure you read your own policy. Broadly speaking, you just don't want to bank on that 90-day grace period or whatever it is in your policy. You get a claim, you need to start thinking about reporting that immediately. Don't get burned. What about a potential claim? What's the time frame of reporting that? Before the end of your policy period. So that means before you renew. So kind of a best practice here that I urge every business owner to do before they renew their E&O policy is, hey, just canvass the staff, canvass the fellow business owners, any other stakeholders in the organization, see if there's anything out there that could be construed as a claim or a potential claim. The last thing you want to do is operate in good faith, but then somebody down the chain of command there's holding it tight to the vest and you end up getting burned. All right, next, let's talk about type. And this is why this really is that important. Well, this could apply to obviously your E&O policy. That's what we've been discussing here. or an E&O policy. Other types of claims made and reported policies, cyber insurance policies, employment practices policies, etc. Same general rules apply. Claim and potential claim, when you have to report it, who is contractually required to report those, etc. Now, obviously, once again, big caveat here, read your own policy and seek qualified legal counsel if you ever have any questions. I am not your attorney. All right, so here you're probably going to say, well, this just wasn't my fault. Hey, fair enough. Maybe it wasn't your fault, but it still could be your potential problem. I'll tell you this. When people lose large sums of money, when your clients end up losing their clients because of some computer-related issue, the reason they hired you is because if they were that good at technology, they just would have done it themselves. So obviously, they're not. They probably don't intricately understand precisely what you're doing. What they're doing is they're essentially throwing money at you, trusting that you are doing this appropriately. So just because it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it isn't your problem. So let's talk about a couple of examples here. Let's say your client was tricked and wired money to a criminal somewhere and they can't get that money back. Is that your problem? It could be. Was it your fault? Maybe not. But think about how the way the legal system works, right? There is what's legal and what is just. And there's not always a large overlap between the two. You have to play by the rules. So if your client gets tricked into wiring money, you find out about that, there's nothing to say that they're not going to come back and try and claw that money back from you. Now, I don't care if they're friends. I don't even care if they're family. I literally deal with claims and potential claims every single week inside of my insurance brokerage. So make sure that you are covering your own butts out there and not inadvertently having coverage denied on you. Another example, client gets hit with ransomware. Well, hey, maybe it was, you weren't even in there to harden their computer system. You're just doing basic kind of sysadmin type stuff. It's just outsourced. And they had denied every recommendation that you had ever put out there about cybersecurity controls, et cetera, et cetera. Is it your fault? Hey, you know what? You're not looking over Karen's shoulder every day, every minute of every day to make sure she's not clicking on the wrong thing. Nonetheless, they could still bring a claim against you. So when you see that your client has been hit with ransomware, you need to start thinking, okay, this very well could be a potential claim. Even if they haven't blamed you yet, this very well could be a potential claim, because the last thing you want to do is, and I'll lay it out like this, even if that potential claim happens the day before you renew your policy, what did that policy language say? At least in our specimen policy. You have to report it during the policy period. So even if it's the day before, you still need to think about reporting that and consider that quite strongly. Next, clients experience cryptojacking. Obviously you are not the one dealing with those particular issues. Is cryptojacking necessarily your direct fault? Hey, maybe not. But I think you see the trend here where problem and fault are two different ideas, just like legal and just are two different ideas. So make sure you understand the differences between the two. All right, next thing we often see is people go, well, this problem's under my deductible, so, maybe I'm just not going to report this to my insurance company. It's somewhat analogous to you getting a little fender bender and you're like, okay, well, it's going to cost me like $300 to the local repair shop to repair that. The deductible on my auto insurance is like $500. So you know what? I'm just going to pay this under the table. Well, there's a couple things you just can't do in insurance policies, and this is broadly speaking across all insurance policies. You cannot settle without insurer consent. You cannot admit liability, and you cannot make voluntary payments. So if you're just going to accept that responsibility and pay to make that issue go away, you're essentially, or I'd say potentially, with a high likelihood, just voiding your own insurance policy. And that is probably not something we want to do. Some of the other factors you need to consider here are there's a multitude of other ways that a small issue can very quickly become a very large issue. So you need to think about punitive damages, defense costs, bad publicity, loss of other clients. Some of the other issues there. A client sees a small problem, and we've seen this many times before. They see a small problem, they go to some other provider, and they say, hey, take a look at this. Well, that other provider is trying to get their business. So they're going to start punching holes or attempting to with every single thing you've done. So with that, you don't want this small problem to now seem like a much larger problem that then turns into a claim. And because you didn't report it, or you decided to settle without insurer consent, make voluntary payments, and admit liability, you could have potentially just voided your own insurance policy. So please start thinking more with risk management, potential liability in mind. Make sure you're understanding the definition of a claim and a potential claim for your policy and what your particular contractual requirements are there. Okay, finally, I always get this question, and so I might as well just go ahead and address it here. If you start reporting potential claims to your tech E&O or your professional liability insurance policy carrier, will they increase your premium? Yes, it is highly possible. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. But there's other factors that you need to keep in mind. Specifically, and this is what I tell all of my own clients. Listen, when you come up for renewal, we can look at those premium increases, right? We can try and go to other providers. We can try and argue with the underwriter, right? Present your case appropriately to them and say, hey, you know what? They were just adhering to policy requirements. Hopefully, knock on wood, nothing came about because of this. Nonetheless, the opposite. Think about that. Let's say you decided not to report it because you didn't want to increase your premium the $1,000 a year or whatever it would be. Well, how well are you going to deal with potentially the $100,000 defense bill plus the $200,000 in damages awarded? So, $1,000 increase versus $300,000 bill, bad publicity, name in the news, etc. Two totally different areas. So don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Don't lose the forest for the trees. Think a little bit longer term there. Yes, I know nobody wants to pay more for insurance. I totally understand that. My own company has insurance too. But you don't want to think too short term, or you very well could burn yourself. All right, so with this, before you renew your insurance policy, and really throughout the entire year, just talk to those staff members. Hey, does anybody know of any potential claims out there? Anything that could potentially bring rise to demand or money or services? And that could be including, but not limited to, clients get hit with ransomware. Clients get duped into wiring large sums of money, to a criminal somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. Just because they haven't blamed you doesn't mean they aren't going to later blame you. So don't get burned. Does anybody know of any claims? Once again, demand for money or services, plus that entire list of issues there. If anybody knows about those, you really need to consider reporting those issues, right? That needs to be at the top of your mind. The days are ending where MSPs had no regulation, very little oversight, and business owners didn't blame them. The economy's tough right now. I get that. So when someone loses money or they lose business, they're going to try and claw that back. And an easy way or an easy entity to go after is going to be that MSP, because guess what? If you try to go to court and you try and defend yourself, what you do is highly technical and highly detailed, and trying to, convert that into terms understandable by a jury of your quote peers is just going to be damn near impossible. Okay, so make sure you are watching out for your business. Now, obviously, it's your decision to make. I cannot tell you precisely with every single circumstance what is a claim, or even more so, what is a potential claim. Now, it's your decision, but at least now you can try and make an educated decision. You have all those factors they could come into play there to make your life a little bit easier and try and keep your business safer. All right, with that, once again, I would ask you to shamelessly share this presentation with any of your fellow business owners. Hopefully you guys are sufficiently terrified to now understand and keep the idea of claims and potential claims at the top of your mind during the policy period and before you renew. If you enjoyed that presentation, this is Damage Control, Cyber Insurance, and Compliance. That is where you can download a free copy of said book, also available on Amazon if you would like to support the cause. And with that, stay safe.